All right, y'all. Welcome to our second Candidates Discuss event. We are Athens for Everyone hosting this event. I'm Erin Stacer. I'm the current president of Athens for Everyone. And with me today is our esteemed panel, joined finally by Mocha Jasmine Johnson, who couldn't join us last time. So we're really glad you're here, Mocha.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And then again, we'll have everybody introduce themselves real quick. So why don't we start with Zach today?
Hey y'all, my name is Zachary Perry. I am running for Georgia State Senate District 46, which covers Clark, Oconee, and Walton County. And I am a law student here in Athens, Georgia, lived here for 6 years. I'm running against Bill Calsert because I feel that he is not representing the interest of his district. In fact, many times he's directly acting against the interest of his district. And I look forward to working with Mocha and Jonathan and other progressive candidates in Georgia and Deborah and hopefully Richard in order to bring progressive politics to Georgia.
Awesome. We want to do Richard.
I'm Richard Dean Winfield. I am running in the special United States Senate race in Georgia, where the appointed incumbent is the notorious Kelly Loeffler. And I'm running in a race that has no primary. Don't confuse it with the other Senate race where John Ossoff recently won the Democratic primary and is facing off against Perdue. My race goes all the way till November with a very likely runoff in January. I'm the philosopher and union member in the race. I've been teaching philosophy at UGA since '82. I've been a member of the United Campus Workers of Georgia since its inception in 2017. It's trying to organize all employees in the state university system. I'm the father of 3 grown-up kids who went through the public schools in Athens. My wife, Sujata, came from India and married me and joined me here in 1983. She's been practicing law since and is currently practicing immigration law. I'm running to bring to Washington the fight for our social rights, which have been neglected, and I think their fulfillment provides a real solution to the crises we're facing: the pandemic crisis, the economic collapse, and the crisis of entrenched racial and gender disadvantage.
Mocha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mocha Jasmine Johnson. I am the co-founder of Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement. I'm also a mother, an educator, an activist, and I'm running for Georgia State House District 117. I've served on Athens Clark County Board of Elections. I'm currently the co-chair with Shane Sims on the Police Advisory Task Force. That's our task is to work towards helping to develop a civilian oversight board. The coach. I have also served on the pre-arrest diversion program task force with the solicitor, C.R. Chisholm, and I am passionate about social justice, racial justice, and you can check out my website at mochaforgeorgia.com. And my opponent is Houston Gaines. He's been in that chair for, I guess, a couple of years now, and it's time for change. I'm running because I believe that I can represent the needs of the people throughout Athens, Oconee, Jackson, and Barrow County. It's time for change. It's time for change. It's time for change. And that is why I am running for office, and I'm willing to fight for the people.
Awesome. Jonathan, you want to go?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me, Erin. So my name is Jonathan Wallace. I am the Democratic candidate for House District 119. This is a role that I served in for from 2017 to 2019, and I'm looking to earn the seat back. I got started in politics with a very, started with the frustration of President Trump being elected and the type of politics that he espoused. I came in wanting to drive accountability for our elected officials. And along the way, I've learned a ton, grown a ton, and seen how important it is that we fight for access to Medicare, healthcare access for folks. We just had our 8th rural hospital close or announce its closure in the state of Georgia. We've given up billions of dollars in taxes. We fully funded education while I was serving, but we've seen that has since been cut without any opportunities to try to raise funds other ways. And we've seen this anemic, wishy-washy lack of recognition for public health professionals' guidelines as to what we need to do to get a handle on this pandemic. And as we'll be discussing today, the impact is still yet to be felt by the majority of folks, believe it or not. I mean, maybe the majority is feeling it in one way or another, but the economic impacts are still waiting in the wings to drop. I think the big rock, if you will, is waiting. So House District 119 is the majority of Oconee County in the southeastern portion of Athens-Clarke County. We'll be happy to represent the people of the district and fight for the people of Georgia once I'm back in the House here on November 3rd.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Deborah Gonzalez.
Well, good Friday afternoon, everybody. My name is Deborah Gonzalez, and I am the candidate for District Attorney for the Western Judicial Circuit. And I am very happy to announce that the Secretary of State did put out the official announcement for this special election. Qualifying is next week, so wish me luck, guys, as I go and qualify in Atlanta next week so that my name is on the ballot, and 150,000 people in Athens, Clarke, and Oconee counties have won their right to an election back. So I'm really thrilled at where we are there. I am running because, as Mocha says, we need change, but as I like to say, we need intentional change. We've had too much of the status quo and the old way of looking at being hard on crime and punitive measures in our criminal legal system. And I want to truly transform it into a criminal justice system by bringing in progressive strategies and looking not at holding people accountable by being cruel, but holding people accountable by using practices like restorative justice and realizing that what we have to do is deal with trauma and violence instead of only looking at these issues of crime. And so I look forward to doing that kind of work, which I started when I was in the legislature serving with Jonathan Wallace. And I can't wait to see him back in there doing the hard work. And Jonathan, don't worry, I'm going to always be there. If you need to vent, you can just call me up. And so really thrilled. Thank you, Athens, for everyone to putting on these bi-weekly conversations. I think it's a great way for people to just get to learn the candidates, right? And how we think about certain things. Thank you.
That's awesome. So for those of you watching, this is our awesome panel that we get to hear from today. And our topic that we're going to be delving into is going to be the eviction crisis. As many of you know, there were moratoriums and I guess there was some kind of assistance for some people. Well, not for Georgia though, was there? There was never any assistance for Georgia, for renters and for those paying mortgages. And that has ended. So we are seeing this week more than several. I think actually there were over 200 backlogged evictions waiting to go. And there's more coming because obviously people right now are out of work and their unemployment benefits just ended and are being stalled for more. So I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on the current eviction crisis, what's going on, maybe giving people a little bit of background if they don't know all the details of how we got here. And then also maybe, as I like for us to segue into some ideas and solutions, especially through policy. Does anybody, Zach's ready to go.
Yeah, so I think it's good to start and lay a foundation for why we got here. And I'm excited to go because housing affordability is why I came to law school and why I really want to get involved in politics. The United States and Georgia specifically, even more specifically Athens, Clarke County, has been experiencing an affordable housing crisis for years. It's been bubbling up, and as I believe is going to be a theme of these bi-weekly meetings, the coronavirus is really just bringing light to these already existing problems. In Georgia, or more specifically in Athens, 60% of the population rents, and 50% of that renting population is cost burdened. meaning that they spend over 30% of their income on housing. So there's already been an issue of not having enough affordable housing in Athens. And so with COVID, we had a lot of people go home, a lot of people not working. And one of the things about Georgia, or at least significant things about Georgia, is the largest sector of the workforce is service industry. It's 70% of the workforce in Georgia. And those were the people that really had to go home. You can't work from home. You can't serve a bar. You can't work retail from home. So they weren't having an income without that extra unemployment and from the federal funds. So as Jonathan pointed out earlier, that's really just put a hold on the significant economic impacts of this crisis. Things are going to get worse before they get better. And without federal aid and hopefully without some state aid, we're not going to be able to forestall the coming crisis, which is an eviction crisis. So a recent article came out, I think it was CBS, released an article that said about 50% of Georgia renters are at risk of being evicted in the state. And Georgia homeless facilities are already overwhelmed. They're not able to cope with the current need. And with that many Georgia families, I think it was 565,000 households are at risk of being evicted in the next 4 months, with an estimated about 381,000 evictions to take place in the next 4 months. So that's to lay the foundation of how serious a crisis this is.
Yeah. I would like to chime in from a different direction as well. I want to add on to that. I just want to share a little experience with you. So basically, my lease ended at the end of June. We were looking for an affordable place to live 2 months prior, before the lease ended. Still couldn't find an affordable place to live. Now, keep in mind, this is COVID-19 as well. They want you to have proof of income. Think about the fact that you have lost a portion of your income. So what is the proof? But you still have to move. You file for unemployment and it takes weeks before unemployment comes in. Okay? So now we we're out of the terms of our lease. So now you're paying month to month, which is higher than the regular rate. So now we're at the very end, very end, to where we have to find some place to live. Now the options are either we're going to move into an area where might not be so safe for me and my children, or the environment that I would want my children in, or I might end up being homeless. But then when I do the research, it seems that college students have an easier time finding housing. They do not have to go through the same requirements that some of the residents of Athens, Clarke County have to go through in order to secure housing. They can actually use their parents' income, some that don't even live in Athens, Clarke County, and they're paying $500, $700 for these rooms, for these houses. So I have college students that are able to find housing quicker, or they even created private housing to where it seems like it's only situated for the students, and the developers are just coming in and taking over different spaces, and it's just pushing us further out. Now, as a candidate, I must stay within my district. In Athens, Clarke County, I'm just telling this story because I'm living it. It's not just based on these numbers here that I'm looking at. It says Athens residents, this is before COVID, Athens residents make 45% of the median income of UGA student families who make $129. That is a lot of money. That's over $100,000 a year. So there is no space here for people that live here that contributes to the community. This is not just about these numbers. It's where something has to change. Someone has to be accountable. If they're not going to be accountable on the state level, then our local government has to jump in. Now, what I saw, some of the people that has been able to relieve some of this stress was organizations that formed within a week called Athens Mutual Aid. We could not go or rely on our government to rescue us. It was a collective community of people that came around and started putting in pool of resources. So if we can do that type of model, why cannot the government propose the same type of model when they have a larger amount of funding and money? Now, the crazy thing to me is half of the people that were collecting unemployment, that money is basically ended. You still have some place you still don't have some place to live, and over 200 evictions are filed with the court. So I would say that I mean, this is out of control. We're sitting here, we're talking about these issues, but this is impacting people's lives in such a way that even when I take office or whomever is in office in 2021, you have to prepare for a crisis. Athens was already 28 to 38% poverty rate. It is going to probably be twice that amount in 2021. There's over 200 people that have filed evictions and people are homeless. So it's a serious problem that really truly needs to be addressed on so many levels. So I am also happy that we're having this conversation here today. So something has to be done on not just in policy, but people have to start, it takes a village, and we have to start using that kind of model as well. And we have to fight for leaders that can empathize with people that are living this. This is not just about numbers. There's people out here that's going to be living in their cars and living in the streets, and they already are while we're having this conversation. So I just really needed to say that.
Thank you for that, Mocha. Yeah.
Could I chime in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to put some of this in national perspective because the problems that people are facing in Athens are being faced by people everywhere in this country. This past month, about 32% of Americans were unable to pay either their mortgage or their rent during July, which means more than 100 million people are facing eviction and foreclosure. And this is all happening on top of a crisis that was building well before our pandemic. Keep in mind that in America, before the pandemic, each year about 1.5 million people experience the trauma of homelessness. And we're talking about families, children, people of all ages. And every night before the pandemic, about 550,000 people would be homeless. About, I think, 193,000 of whom would be sleeping out in the streets, not on any kind of shelter. Now, along with this homelessness, you have a situation where landlords are gaining a higher slice of our national income than ever in our history, whereas wage earners are earning a smaller slice of our national income than ever in our history. And that reflects how rents as well as home prices have been rising far beyond wages and inflation. And keep in mind that when we speak about how people are suffering various kinds of severe burdens in rent, it's not just a question of how much of your income goes to paying rent or mortgage payments. You have to think about how much money do you have left over? Mm-hmm. Because you could be a fairly wealthy person spending a lot of your income on a very expensive apartment or house and still have plenty of money left over to live. According to the government's figures, you need $1,400 left over from your housing costs to be able to escape deep poverty. And oddly enough, Fox News finally admitted in their Atlanta station that in Georgia, you can't afford any dwelling unless you make over $19 an hour.
Right.
We're not talking about earning $7.25 an hour, which is the current minimum wage, and we're not talking about $15 an hour, which a lot of Democrats talk of as if it were a living wage. No, you need really $20 an hour to be able to afford any kind of living space. And you have to keep in mind, in order to be able to maintain a dwelling, you've got to have sufficient health, both physical and mental, to be able to live independently and keep your place. And we all know well that our nation is failing to provide that for people. And that's one of the things that contributes, obviously, to homelessness. Another side of it is that we don't get any guarantee of legal representation in civil cases, which include all of those important cases pertaining to eviction. The facts are that 85% of the people who have a civil matter that goes to the courts, which can include eviction, have no representation. And when they have no representation, they end up being evicted in a large majority of the cases. That contributes to homelessness, the fact that we don't have civil representation. So we need to keep all of these things in mind. And right now, the vacancy rate on apartments nationwide is at an all-time low. I'm sorry, an all-time, the vacancy rate is very low. In other words, there are very few apartments to be found, and there are very few affordable apartments to be found, given how incomes have lagged behind rents as well as mortgage payments. Now, of course, we're in this economic depression caused by the total mismanagement of the pandemic. And we're in a situation where there is a huge crisis that goes far beyond anything we've seen in our history. And I don't know if they're going to call them Trumpvilles, like they spoke about the Hoovervilles of homeless people sprouting up in every community. But we need to act immediately on a national level. We need to have a permanent moratorium on evictions, foreclosures, and don't forget utility turnoffs. People can't live if they don't have their utilities, including broadband. We can't shelter in place or quarantine unless we have a place to live in. So it's a matter of life and death that we provide emergency housing to the homeless and keep everyone who is in a dwelling in their dwelling. And we also have to think about landlords and lenders. We can't let them go insolvent. So we have to ensure that everyone has income. And it can be replacement income from what they've lost. And it has to be sufficient, at least $20 an hour, so that people can stay where they are, so they can pay their rents, they can pay their mortgages. And that's a huge part of the puzzle we're facing. And I think you can see by the magnitude of what's involved, there has to be national action. Our municipal government doesn't have the resources to do the job. Our states have more, but also not quite enough. They need federal assistance, especially with tax revenues cratering in the states and states not being able to borrow or print money like the national government can. So.
Well, that's a good segue actually into, I'd like Jonathan and Deborah to be able to talk a little bit more about what's going on in the state level right now.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot, and then Deborah, I'll turn it over to you here shortly. I wanted to address two things. One, we already have a homeless crisis in this community. We have had one. Before I ever got involved in politics, I was involved with an organization called the Interfaith Hospitality Network, where my wife and I volunteered to help out folks who were trying to get back on their feet. And what I learned in part of that work, that organization now is called Family Promise, is that the way that homelessness was measured in our children's population in the schools, they do a 1 point in time measure and they say how many of these kids are in a home or homeless. And at that time, which was a few years ago, before I got involved in 2017, there was around 800 kids in the Athens-Clarke County school system who were considered homeless at that time for that year. The organization that I was a part of, they don't serve everybody. They don't serve families with a husband and a wife, or a spouse, or a man and a woman. They only serve mothers and children. They would not serve full families. So we have already had a homeless crisis. It's been ongoing. And what we're going to see is the magnitude of that is going to grow as the eviction crisis grows. And we were discussing a little bit before we got started, there's been no moratorium on eviction processing. What has happened is that, as I understand it, is that the courts have slowed down because they're not meeting in person. So those cases are still being filed. And so the point that I was trying to make, and other folks are reinforcing, is that there's another shoe to drop with the challenges that we're going to face as a community. And that other shoe is going to be bigger, it's going to be heavier, and it's going to be more difficult. And as Richard has just mentioned, we won't be able to solve it just with local help. We won't be able to solve it just with the state level. It does take leadership at the federal level, which we're missing. In the meantime, you have to have legislators who are willing to fight and speak to this and hold our federal officials accountable, who are willing to stand up and speak out against this. And the lack of leadership that we've seen from the beginning of the mismanagement of this pandemic, where it was dismissed, where public health guidelines were dismissed, where they're still being dismissed on a regular basis, it's going to exacerbate the problem that we all know is coming. Too many people are lacking the courage to face the challenges that are coming with the rental crisis, with the eviction crisis, which will turn into a homeless crisis, which will turn into a health crisis, which is going to exacerbate the mental health crisis that we already experience.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take a couple steps back. And what I want to do is I want to give some context about what has been happening on the federal and state level. Because a lot of people have said, well, wasn't there help for this, right? And many people have heard of the CARES Act and that people have gotten stimulus checks from that. But what people have to understand is that inside the CARES Act, there was language that created a federal eviction moratorium. And so people thought, well, that's great. Nobody can get evicted. But there was a nuance to it, meaning that the only evictions that would be stopped are those if the landlord, right, had received money through a federal program. Okay, and that's really important. So it didn't cover everybody. And that is why then specific states created their own moratoriums. So Florida had an eviction moratorium. The problem is that Georgia has never had a moratorium. Okay, so the only thing we had here was the CARES Act. The CARES Act, that particular piece of the CARES Act actually expired on July 25th. It has not been renewed. So that federal protection, even for those limited people, is now gone. Okay, so that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that in Georgia, we have had a series of what are called emergency orders by the Supreme Court, the Georgia Supreme Court, that then sets up certain rules for all the other court systems in the state. And that emergency order has basically said not that the courts would close, but that the courts would only be attending to essential matters. Now, in one way, you can say anybody who has a court issue, that issue is going to be essential to them, right? But that's not the way that the court looks at it. So when it looks at evictions, it didn't consider it essential. So all they've been doing, because landlords have continued to file the paperwork, they have not stopped that. But all that's been happening is that it's now a backlog in the court system because the courts are not looking at them. Well, you know what else the courts haven't done since this began 5 months ago? They haven't had a grand jury. They haven't had a jury by trial, even in a civil or a criminal case, which means we have people waiting in jails who have not had their constitutional right to a speedy trial. Why? Because they cannot figure out how to do this. How to do a virtual jury trial, right? Even with the technology, but to essentially protect the constitutional rights of the defendants. Before I logged on here, I was on another Zoom meeting with the Supreme Court Justice and the judges talking about this very thing, because for the first time, what's been happening is that the judges have thought, okay, this is going to be over. 1 month, a couple of weeks, it's going to be over. They finally acknowledged today that they have to find other answers, that we are never going to go back to the moment where we can say everything's opened up for business anymore. We just can't do it. The risks are too high. So for the first time, that COVID-19 Judicial Task Force is actually looking at what does the new normal look like, because opening up the courtrooms is not going to be the same. Which means that when it comes to evictions, there's still a lot of questions out there on how this is all going to come out. Now, there is one piece of protection. A couple of years ago, the Georgia General Assembly actually passed a bill that said that landlords cannot do self-evictions. They cannot take it upon themselves to bully people out. They must get that official piece of paper, right? They have to go to court. And so that is what has stopped a lot of these evictions, although we still hear all the time of landlords who are doing what is basically illegal, trying to bully people out, or trying to say we're going to raise the rent to this amount, and people are stuck and they just cannot pay it. Okay. Or landlords who say, I don't care what the law says, you need to pay me. Right? Because as Richard Winfield did mention, these landlords are what? They also need the money to then go pay their mortgages. Well, the Federal CARES Act also had language that protected them. That is now gone, right? So we're seeing this trickle effect. It hurts the landlords, it hurts the renters, it keeps getting worse and worse. But we really need to start looking at that things are not going to go back to the normal the way they were pre-March. We really have to start looking at systems as to what's going to be best for the community going forward. Can we get mortgages canceled? Because one of the things that was happening for some of these landlords was that their mortgage companies would say, okay, you don't have to pay for 3 months, but on the 4th month, you got to give us 4 months of your mortgage. They couldn't afford that either, right? Because nobody was going to give them 4 months of rent.
Right.
And so we still really need to take sort of a step back and start thinking about these issues in the most basic level. Look, shelter is a public health issue, especially in the time of COVID. And we have to start looking at this differently than just getting people evicted or just a money exchange. We have to look at this as a public health crisis. And that's the only way that we're going to go through this. I agree completely with Richard that we need federal dollars. Well, it's being held up, right? It's being held up right now in Congress, where you have the Senate saying, yeah, we want to give more money to business, but we're not going to give more money to individuals. Well, that's not going to help individuals. That's not going to get us out of this crisis at all in terms of that. And the last thing that I just want to mention, since you did say, speak about the General Assembly, there has been talk between yesterday and today about Governor Kemp bringing the General Assembly back into a special session. And there's a lot of conjecture about what would they be going through, what bills will they be looking at in this. And so if they do go back to session, we have to mobilize and start calling our representatives, start calling our senators to deal with this issue, right? About evictions and mortgages before it gets even worse than what it is. Because as Jonathan said, the shoe is still waiting there and it is going to drop. The question is, when does it drop? And do we prepare before it drops so that we can help the people who are going to be out there?
One thing that gives all of this greater urgency is the resumption of schooling. Of course, it's being done differently in different parts of our various districts, but some of it is being done remotely. So how can students carry on remote work when their families are being evicted, when they're facing, a looming homelessness? And obviously, this also has to do with everything concerned with being able to contain the pandemic, any kind of sheltering in place, any type of quarantining. So we've got to remember that this is something that all problems are going to be concentrated in staving off. Because if you don't have a home, you can't exercise any of your freedoms properly. And it's really a foremost problem we have to deal with.
So ideally, if any of y'all are in the seats that you're running for, well, Jonathan's already there, but what does your solution to this look like? And I know that's a tall order because there's, as you were just saying, Richard, there's this way in which everything overlaps and influences everything else. So yeah. Solving housing is far more complex than it sounds and is more than just solving housing in a certain way. Yeah, if you have policy ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Well, on the one hand, there are the long-term policy transformations, and then there's the emergency short-term things. We can follow the lead of other countries, which have not allowed people to be deprived of income. They've in effect nationalized payroll. They've more or less taken over payroll for businesses that are not able to operate properly. So instead of people being laid off, they're technically on the job and they're receiving their full income. And people thereby can pay their rents or pay their mortgages if they have them. Of course, they have access to health care. No one is without health care in any other developed nation. And that's another key to the puzzle, right? And immediately we need to cover all uninsured health care costs by having it be covered by Medicare. And we can have a national moratorium and have it be, unlimited on any kind of evictions, foreclosures, or utility turnoffs. And what will allow lenders and landlords to survive is that we ensure that everyone has income, and a fair income, not a poverty income, but a fair income. You have all these people complaining about how the unemployment payment of $600 a week allowed people to actually have more money than they did when they were working at jobs where they were paid poverty incomes. Well, they shouldn't be paying poverty incomes. We don't want them to go back to being living under poverty income where they can't pay their rent or their mortgages or provide for healthcare and so forth. So I think we really have to work on all these things. We have to ensure everyone's solvent. We've got to have fair income guaranteed for everyone and provide jobs for those who can't find them that can be organized safely, and replacement income for those who cannot. Have a moratorium on evictions, foreclosures, and utility turnoffs. We have to ensure that everyone who has any kind of civil case will be provided with legal counsel. And I think we can do that by applying the idea of Medicare for All to legal services with a Legal Care for All program that does the same thing. And then I think we're going to be in a position to be able to meet this challenge and make these permanent fixtures of a fair society, where everyone has a guaranteed livelihood, everyone has access to legal care, everyone has access to decent housing, including broadband, and also access to medical care. Then we're in a position where we can begin to have our schools operate properly. Obviously, we need to add public child care and elder care, so people who are working, who can't be at home, can nonetheless know that their families are taken care of. So I think all of that has to be put into place, and we can do it.
Awesome. And that would be a lot of job creation too, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about their ideas?
Yeah, I like how Richard, he spoke a little bit about there's the direct immediate need, and then there's the fundamental challenge that's been here all along, because as a society, we have seen wealth inequality grow. We've seen the folks at the top reap the rewards, and we've seen the folks at the bottom shoulder the burden. And until we address that fundamental challenge, we're just putting band-aids on the problems that we have. And what we've seen with the politicization of this pandemic, by the Republicans starting at the very top, at the very beginning, we could have treated this challenge earlier, more aggressively, and limited the negative cost that's going to be borne by us all. That could have been done much sooner. Without that, it is at the state level. We are going to be overwhelmed at the state level. We will find ourselves shortly overwhelmed with hospital capacity. We've seen here in this region, in our region here, that we've already, beds have been converted, new capacity has been expanded due to the needs of the community. And some of those needs are COVID based, but with schools opening here in Oconee County, which is portions of the district, we have 90% of the students returning. There are folks who are, I literally saw on Facebook today, people saying, hey, where can I find a place to live in the county now? And they can't. They're struggling to find affordable housing in Oconee County. So what we can do at the state level is we have to stop balancing the books on the backs of the people. We have to look at the corporate tax cuts that we've given away. We have to look at a governing philosophy that assumes that if we give money to corporations and we give tax breaks to corporations and we give tax breaks to private institutions, that's going to result in the rising tide. That hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for the last 30 years or 40 years. So why would we double down and think that's going to work again? And that's exactly what our Republican legislature did this last legislative session. And as Deborah mentioned earlier, they're looking to take another bite at the apple because it hasn't worked. And it's not going to work. And so to address it, we have to address the minimum wage. I was an advocate when I ran the first time around, saying it needs to be raised. It needs to be raised. We need to have a $15 minimum floor. But as Richard said, that is the minimum. When you look at the rate of inflation over the last 30 or 40 years, if minimum wage tracked that, we would see minimum wage being at $27, $28 an hour. That would be a sufficient amount for a family to be able to not be focused on survival, so that they're not focused on where am I going to live. They can focus on making sure their kids are succeeding in school. So these are difficult times. And unfortunately, the burdens of the times have yet to be felt by everybody. And when that awareness comes to all of the people, including the privileged folks who right now are just so happy to be going back to school out here in Oconee County and thinking that everything is good, it's coming. So we need to act sooner than later. We need to be addressing. We will not get our arms around what I'm going to start calling the pandemic tax that has been enforced and imposed upon us by the lack of leadership by our Republican legislature, up and down the levels, starting at the federal level, coming all the way down. So we've got to get these folks out. They don't know how to lead. You've got to get Zach, you've got to get Richard, you've got to get Deborah, you've got to get Mocha and myself. We've got to get in there because we are folks who have the courage to look at these problems square in the face, speak to the facts that are on the ground, speak to the experiences that folks are experiencing, the ones that have become aware of these problems now, and making those folks aware of the problem, that the problem has existed all along.
I've been thinking a lot about even the statement of what Richard said about the $20 an hour, and and it's been wrapping around my mind, and I've been looking at the numbers. So on an average family, if you want to live in a decent area, even if it's dealing with an apartment complex, it's around $1,000 or more per month for that apartment complex where you can have decent living. So if you're not making you have to make 3 times the income. So that's $3,000 that you have to show that you make per month. So if you're not making $20 an hour, that means you're working maybe 2 or 3 jobs just to show that you make 3 times the income to qualify to live in a decent area. Then he points out about, okay, when you don't live in a decent area, it also impacts your child education. When you have to work 2 to 3 jobs just to put food on the table, it impacts your child education because you're not there to really support, provide that extra support. So this is such a complex problem because it actually starts with people being able to make enough money without having to overexhaust yourself working 3 or 4 jobs to live in a decent area. So now I'm looking at it as a state representative. What are we going to do when we walk into the house? The shoe hasn't dropped yet, and it's going to drop. Over 200 evictions. And we have to figure out how to get funding. We have to figure out how to get funding to local governments so that they can provide some type of economic relief, not only to the families, but also to the landlords, because they have to pay their mortgages, and it's less a trickle down effect. It's like we have to freeze. And if it wasn't such a capitalistic model that we're built on, it wouldn't be so difficult for our representative to understand on many different levels that we need to put something in place that currently kind of stop putting pressure on the landlords. Therefore, the landlords will stop putting pressure on the tenants until we figure out what this new future is going to look like. How are we going to live? How are we going to function? People can't even go back to work full time. Where is this funding going to come from? Are we going to support them on a universal income? What are we going to do to relieve that? Now, in addition to that, we need to propose more incentives for home ownership, for developers, so that they are doing things like building mixed income homes. So it's more affordable for everyone to kind of move in once this crisis is over. But I would definitely say this is a very complex problem. It's going to hurt people on so many different levels. And we have to figure out how to put pressure on a federal level to get more funding on a state level in order to distribute more funding to our local governments so they can aid and help our people. We have to figure out how to comfortably put a freeze somewhere to where landlords and tenants can figure out how they can move forward without having to worry about having to pay the big brother. And also proposing more incentives to where people can either to the developers for mixed income housing or for home ownership for those that want to move into a new home. Because right now you have to have basically a 620 or higher tax credit, plus make a certain amount of money in order to own a home. So it's just a very complex and difficult problem that needs to be addressed on multiple levels. So speaking from a person that has lived it on different levels, this is something that has to be addressed, not just on a state level, but federally. And we also need to mobilize on a local level and on a community level, and help to support each other.
I want to add in and just kind of speak briefly on a few long-term solutions and add on to what some of my fellow panelists have mentioned. So the problem underlying the eviction crisis is that we have an affordable housing crisis. It's been going on for years, and to Mocha's point on encouraging developers to build affordable housing, mixed income housing, however you want to look at it, the reason we have an affordable housing crisis is it's not profitable. In most places in the country, it's actually developers would lose money if they built units for affordable units. And it varies by area to area, but that really underlies the fact that we have to raise wages. Georgia workers are making, as low as $5.15 an hour, which is the state minimum wage. If you're exempted from the federal minimum wage, you're not even making that $7.25 an hour. I mentioned earlier that the service industry is the largest industry in Georgia. Retail or food employees are making $300 some odd a week on average across the state of Georgia. In Athens, Clark County, it's about $319. In Oconee and Walton County, it's below $300. And these are the people that make up the largest section of our low-income housing, and they can't afford to live in the units that are available. So from a state level, I'm normally not a fan of state-imposed preemption or state-imposed programs. But because Georgia has 159 counties, this is an issue that needs to be tackled from a state level in coordination with local governments. There's a really great article called Beyond the Double Veto, and it talks about a requirement of the state government to say every municipal government has to provide a plan for how to achieve affordable housing within 5 years, and then another affordable housing goal within 10 years and 15 years. And the reason that it's divided by municipal governments, it's different. So the way that Oconee would address affordable housing concerns is not the same way that Athens would. So Oconee might have less of an issue with low income housing and more of an issue with middle income housing. Athens is both. And in Athens, you have a problem where about 60% of homes are homeowner occupied. I did a study for my internship with Athens Land Trust this summer of my own neighborhood. Out of 155 homes, only 61% were homeowner occupied. The rest were rental units. Athens is filled and inundated with investment units. Over 20% of those non-homeowner occupied units were owned by people outside of Athens. So these aren't Athens real estate agencies, aren't Athens homeowners with a second home, to have a little bit of a side of income. These are largely parents that have bought a home for their student to live in for 4 years and have some roommates, and they keep that home. And that money doesn't stay in the neighborhood, doesn't stay in the community, and goes back to wherever it was. There was even one that the address was listed at the Mogadishu Center at the UN compound in New York. So there are too many units that are not owned by the people that live in them. The housing stock is largely focused on luxury student housing or high-end housing. We have a lack of low-income and middle-income housing. The way that you address that starts with municipal governments looking at their zoning laws. Recently, there was, I think it was either Minneapolis, changed its zoning laws so that all that single-family zoning would allow for duplexes and triplexes. In Athens, you don't have that. Single-family zoning only allows for single-family homes, and it doesn't allow for accessory dwelling units. Add on the fact that people can make $5,000 a game day weekend by turning their home into an Airbnb, and you're further reducing the available stock in Athens. So by requiring local communities to come up with a concrete plan to improve affordable housing, you are allowing for a little bit of municipal independence, allowing localities to choose their own methods, but you're also saying this needs to be done. This is a statewide issue because people are commuting into Athens, people are commuting into Atlanta. It's not just the cities that are having the problems, it's the rural areas and everywhere in between. And as I said at the beginning, that we have to raise wages. $15 is the kind of standard for Democratic elected officials, but that's not going to pay for most of housing in Georgia. It's not going to support a family. And I think Richard made a good point earlier when it said it's not just the share of your income that matters, it's also how much you have left over. So one of the most prevalent ways to address affordable housing are subsidies. And so, you have Athens Housing Authority or different housing authorities that set it so that a resident only pays 30% of their income. But if their income is only $12,000 a year, even if they're only paying 30%, the money they have left over isn't going to allow them to live a good life or exercise their rights or pursue any kind of personal growth. And so we have to start and we have to look at labor rights and we have to look at labor laws in order to increase the individual income of Georgia households.
I think an important issue is the lure of home ownership. It's sort of part of the American dream, or at least one version, is that you eventually end up being able to get a home of your own. And it used to be the United States led the world in the percentage of home ownerships. Now we do not. Now it's fallen behind. And what's made it particularly difficult for people to aspire to own a house is not only that housing prices are increasing and that there's been a tendency for developers to build large houses that are expensive rather than so-called, there's a term for the first house you get, I forget the term for it. But the other thing is because, what's that?
Starter homes.
Starter homes, exactly, starter homes. They're not building starter homes. They're getting much more profit out of building these large or oversized McMansions and the like. But the other side of it is that with rents going up, it's harder for people to accumulate the kind of money they need to put a down payment down. And you have on top of that, the second greatest source of personal debt, which is student loans. Large numbers of Americans are sort of drowning under this immense student loan debt, and then healthcare finances. So all of this makes it very difficult for people to be able to entertain the idea of getting a house. Now, of course, getting a house, getting a mortgage can also be a financial disaster, as people learned in the 2008 crisis, where particularly vast numbers of minority people who had been lured by these kind of ultimately pernicious loans, which were given out and then resold to people who really were not going to be able to keep up the payments, given what they were. And so you had, when the crisis took into effect, you had 10 million people losing their homes, 10 million foreclosures. A large percentage were African Americans. It was the largest destruction of African American wealth in our lifetime. It was presided over, alas, by none other than Barack Obama. Bailed out the banks, but didn't provide any money, any relief for the people who lost their homes. And then there were an additional 4 million homeowners who were stuck with mortgages where what they owed was greater than the value of their homes. So you have to keep in mind, It's not as if home ownership is an ideal. It could be nice if you can afford it and manage to do so. Certain things are making it more and more difficult. But there's also the problem of supply. There's not an adequate supply of affordable homes in this country. Now, Athens, we have the head of, at least one of our state representatives is the head of Habitat for Humanity. We also have a strong Athens Land Trust. Both are trying to use a certain kind of social housing to provide affordable housing. Habitat for Humanity has this model of sweat equity, where people are going to help build the home that they're going to take over. You have the Athens Land Trust, where you don't own the property, there's the land, but you own the house. You're offered a very affordable mortgage. You can then, if you have to leave, you can sell it at a decent rate, and then it goes back to the land trust as more stock for affordable housing. But the numbers of these organizations, of what they provide, is very limited. Habitat for Humanity provided about 16,000 homes in recent year. The land trust movement throughout the United States, again, it was in the teens. We're talking about a need for millions of homes. So we need also to think about public housing, but not public housing that is warehousing the poor. First of all, we should eliminate poverty by having a federal job guarantee and replacement income at fair wages. But we also should have public housing that is mixed. They do that in Sweden, where people of all income levels are able to make use of public housing. And another side of our public housing problem, in a way, is we criminalize poverty, and we criminalize personal drug use and in a way mental illness. And what happens if you have a criminal record is you can't get access to public housing, as well as all sorts of other benefits. And that's a problem that should not be there.
Yeah, and I mean, who better to speak on that than Deborah?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump right in there. Why? Because the number one cause of crime is financial instability. And so what Athens, Clark County, and Oconee needs to look at is that when these things start hitting, crime is actually going to increase. Not because we have more bad people, but because the situations are so bad, people are left without any options. And when you have no options and your children need to eat, and society is not helping you feed those children, things are going to start to happen. Opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice, right? And so when we look at these issues of what is happening with housing, and I know the other thing you wanted to talk today about was employee rights. Don't know if we're going to get there, Erin. We might have to wait for next time. Yeah, but they all come together, because one of the problems, Zachary is talking about the minimum wage, and Jonathan mentioned that as well. But what about employees who are really scared right now about going in? We've seen, teachers who have been sort of anonymously reaching out saying, we are so scared to go back into these classrooms, yet we are told if we don't, we lose our jobs. And then what do we do? I mean, when I have someone who's working, in total disclosure, on my campaign, who works in a school, goes by PCV pipes and shields, and then spends the day with his wife in his classroom setting up these cubicles, all out of his pocket, right? All that's coming out of his pocket. So you're taking now teachers who used to buy supplies for their classes, right? Coloring books and crayons and pencils and note papers, now buying PCV pipes and plastic shields to protect their kids, and they're afraid. Or people in the service industry. I can't tell you how many calls a day I get from individuals who are saying, listen, somebody tested positive and they will not close the restaurant. Somebody tested positive and they're not letting the people know, and they're still opening. And we are not allowed to say anything, and we are not allowed not to come in. We will lose the job. Okay. And yes, ACC government has set up sort of like this COVID-19 hotline that employees are supposed to be able to call and be protected. How far does that go? We have whistleblower laws, but those are very difficult to enforce, okay? And we just don't have, that's the other problem. There's no enforcement of these regulations for security and safety. Why are we still having a discussion over whether we can have a mask mandate or not? How much more scientific evidence do we need to present that shows that masks work? You know, they did a recent study. The states that had mask mandates, COVID has gone down. The states that do not, like Georgia, COVID comes up. That seems very straightforward, more common sense than anything to say, then this is what we need to do. And I love, there was a young student who said, you know, I don't understand if they can regulate the length of my skirt, or if I wear spaghetti straps, how can the schools then say that they cannot regulate whether they're wearing a mask or not? Okay, so we know that they will enforce things that they feel they need to enforce, but not other things that are going against contrary to what they are dealing with. And so, you know, I know there's been a lot about this issue of affordable housing and the crisis that we are in, and that it's been years, right? None of this happened overnight, and none of this happened because of COVID. I think what we fail to realize is that what COVID did is sort of unveil what was there, okay? But a lot of these issues, the affordable housing issue, the workers' rights, what Mocha was saying about even trying to get an apartment, you know, talk about the criminalization of homelessness or the criminalization of drug use. Those are things that I will be dealing with as DA, right? And so people ask, why should I care about housing? Because it directly affects the crime rate. Why should I care about whether people are getting a living wage? Because it's going to directly affect the crime rate and about keeping our communities safe. And the other thing is, you know, when they take a look at what makes certain communities safe, what they find is that it's not an increase of police presence, it's an increase of resources. It's resources that makes the difference. And that is exactly what we're talking about here. The resource to have a home, the resource to be able to have food and to eat. And you know, when Mocha talks about the community is doing this, the Athens Mutual Aid, the Hispanic community through Civic and ULEAD and the AIRC, the people themselves having to help each other, you know, and that's great that all these people have their right heart. But let us not accept that as an excuse to let those in power then all of a sudden say, well, it's not our responsibility. You guys are doing the great job. Keep doing it. Hey, we all pay a lot of taxes. We all pay a lot of taxes. Mm-hmm. And what I keep asking for is that let us effectively spend the tax money that we're getting, because we are not doing that. Right? We're giving it to these big organizations. Look at what happened with the PPE COVID relief. And you're having these big organizations like the Lakers getting that money, and 80% of women-owned and minority-owned businesses got zero. Okay? That's a problem, because that also is showing you where are the priorities, right? Where are you spending your money? How do you put it in your budget? Those are the values, and our current administration, both on the federal and the state level, this administration, their values are not with the people. Okay, they are looking at the people as disposable in this environment. And because they look at them as disposable, and because they look at them as not having value, they are not providing the services and the resources that the people need. And they'll be in for a rude awakening, because when there's no people to buy the products, there'll be no money, right? Everything will stop, because business needs people. They need people to work in them. They need people to buy the products. They need people to get those services. And when the people are dead or dying or sick, because you can have 5 billionaires, they're only going to buy 5 hamburgers, right? They're not going to buy 1 million hamburgers each. So let's really look at, well, maybe 1 or 2 might eat more than 1 hamburger, but I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. There's so few of them.
Pass them out.
Right, they'll pass them out, but there's so few of them. When we talk about consumption, about who's really consuming what is produced, what is served in our community, it is not those people with all of that money, right? And so I think it's very short-sighted. But then we have to hold people accountable. We have to hold our leaders accountable. Come November, we need to vote them out, okay? Because they are not doing what the people need them to do. And I know that for many people, you know, there is more reason to be skeptical and cynics about politicians, right? I get that. I get that they haven't done what they were supposed to do. But there is a group of good politicians. People are coming from the people themselves, you know, Mocha, Jonathan, Zach, you know, these are people who come from the community. Mocha expressing what she went through with, you know, her home, and her husband, Noah, what he went through with that racism. You know, this is real life. This is not some, you know, stump speech to get sort of the compassionate vote. This is real life. These are the kind of people that we need in elected officials, because they know, they understand, right? I always say, look, I'm a mom. I can stretch $1, right? Because when you're a mom and you're a single mom, let me tell you, that dollar has to go really far, okay? And so you want people who are going to be good in budgeting, go get the moms, go get the single parents who are out there. And there are single fathers who have to do that too, and great for them. But when 54% of our legislature puts down as their occupation retired, that is a sign that they are totally out of touch with what's happening every single day in our communities. And that's what we need to do. And we can only do that, we can only make that changes when we change the people who are in elected office. So I will say it until I'm blue in the face. Vote, 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 vote. Because even John Lewis, in his last words, what did he said? Voting is the most powerful tool, non-violent tool of revolution. So that's what we need to do. We need to vote.
I wanted to ask you guys what you thought about inclusionary housing programs, because that is something that I want to push for as on the state level, proposing policy so that we can have more inclusionary housing. So I wanted to get you guys feedback on that. And thank you, Deborah, because it is important for everyone to vote and to understand that, you know, it took me some time to say, okay, I'm going to run for office because politicians have had a really bad taste in my mouth. You know, it's like, I don't trust politicians, you know, and then I started meeting some people that were some really genuine people, you know, and we need more genuine people that's not in this for power grab or because you went to school and you study and you want to move up the ladder on a political level, but then you don't know what it feels like, or you're not even engaged with the majority of the people that you represent. So you just look at it as numbers. It doesn't matter to you. They're just numbers. But how do you guys, what is your thoughts on inclusionary housing programs? I just wanted to hear y'all feedback on that.
I love them. They're for viewers. It's so inclusionary housing is a response, kind of a play on what is called exclusionary housing or exclusionary zoning. So zoning in history has been used to exclude certain people from living in certain neighborhoods. This is also kind of a growth of the NIMBYism, or not in my backyard movement, of, you know, a lot of people, very much a lot of them just upper class white progressives, love the idea of affordable housing, love the idea.
Redlining.
Yeah, redlining. They love the idea of all these things, just not next to me, you know, put that somewhere else. And so they built these. I saw one person call local governments cartels of homeowners, because they go to these planning commission meetings that set up zoning and say, no, you can't put this here. The requirement to open up a halfway house in Athens is incredibly high. You have to go through so many loops, but this is a very good community thing. This is satisfying very important community needs. So inclusionary housing at its base level is saying, you know, if you build a 100 apartment unit, 30% of those units have to be affordable housing units.
Right.
Sometimes they go a little bit differently, where like there's an extra tax and that tax is put into affordable housing processes. But really it's any method to address affordable housing in a way that isn't just trying to build more affordable units in the bad neighborhoods, but also saying we need affordable housing everywhere.
Right.
Because there's a lot of studies that show that if you were only ever surrounded by poverty when you're growing up, you don't know anything differently, and your success is capped. You're not able to succeed as well. But if you live in mixed income, diverse neighborhoods, you do better, and you have more opportunities. So yeah, inclusionary housing is fantastic, and we need to do more of it.
Yeah,
One of
and
the-
to speak to what Richard was saying earlier about starter homes, one of the problems in Athens is that construction is so expensive. So of course, profit wise, like you mentioned earlier, there's no profit in necessarily building starter homes, because the supplies to build those homes is the cost is just so expensive. So even myself, we were looking at different homes to possibly purchase, per se, for the past couple of years. And the average home is like $250,000. And that goes back to the income. The average house in Athens, if you want to live in a decent neighborhood, is $250,000. So it's like you can't even find a decent home. Too many of them, they go really fast. They're pushing out to Statham, out, to the outskirt areas. So the income thing, it comes back to the income again,
One thing about inclusionary housing is it really gives us a chance to build housing that is truly democratic in character. Trump just blew his dog whistle saying, I'm going to save your suburbs. I'm not going to let any kind of low-income housing come into your suburbs. What happened through, the development of suburbs, which obviously, to begin with, were racially exclusionary, given that loans were not provided to people of color. But they also provided a whole way of development that, first of all, was very, very energy inefficient, because it produced the suburbanization with these single-family dwellings that were apart from one another, that required cars to go everywhere. You didn't have mixed-use neighborhoods where you could actually walk to businesses, to cultural institutions, to places of worship. It segregated people not only by race, not only by income, but also by age, right? Because you basically had families that were, let's say, having children and the like. And because you had to go around by car, if you were no longer driving, it's impossible to live in these areas. And they're used much more fossil fuels. It's much more extensive to lay out the utility lines in this way. So, we have a chance to rethink how we want to build communities. So we have communities where people can bike and walk, where workplace, shopping, medical services, cultural institutions, people of all races, all ages, all income levels can be in community with one another. And I think that's what's really at stake. We want to have a housing that's both environmentally sound and democratically sound. And we have an opportunity to forge through zoning reform, through public financing of housing of various sorts, through incentives of all sorts, to really remake our country so that we have an architecture of freedom.
And
now we have an opportunity to do it, given the crisis we're facing.
And if I can add, we also need participation from people in the community that usually are not given a voice at the table. So I was told that when, Athens made a 10-year plan, we have the Envision Athens, and that's a plan. Well, the plan before Envision Athens, they intentionally said they wanted to create student housing, these apartment complexes in downtown Athens. They wanted to keep the students there. And so when they did their zoning, that was what they were trying to achieve, right? They used zoning in order to achieve that goal. And so what we need now is to say, what is the goal? If the goal is affordable housing, then let's use zoning for that. Let's put in place the regulations and the guidelines that then give the developers incentives. Right now, if a development happens, I think it's like 1% that has to go to public art in their budgets. I was part of the Athens Cultural Arts Commission. And so that's where, they get the money for like the bus shelters and these other public art pieces, why can't there be some fee in that development that X amount of that budget then has to go into affordable housing if it's not going to be X amount of units? And I just think one of the problems that we have is we do not have the political will to fight that battle. And it is a battle. It's a battle against, the developers. It's a battle against those in real estate. We had the Real Estate Association of Athens issue a letter to the mayor and commissioners about, raising concerns. Okay. And I get a call from the Atlanta Realtor Association president telling me, Deborah, what's going on in Athens? What are they doing? And I'm like, hey, it's your people. You should know what they're doing. Why are you calling me? But, to have the Athens Realtor Association come out and write a letter like that,
Yeah.
Certainly shows you the difficulty, the mountain, the obstacles we have to get through in order to get the affordable housing and the inclusionary zoning through. And until we have, elected officials who are going to stand up to that, it's going to be really difficult.
And
Very difficult.
And in Athens, it's like, I said, it's 60% renters, 40% homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
But homeowners, because they pay the taxes they pay, and because they are always at planning commission meetings, they kind of hold a larger segment of power in local politics. If you look at the zoning map, I did a piece for a project, and it was, if you overlay the zoning map of Athens over a demographic map of Athens, the demographics of Athens are built into the zoning map. The least restrictive zonings are over the highest minority areas. And this is just built into the zoning of Athens. And so we're listening to a minority group of homeowners, and that they're dictating
Right.
how housing looks in Athens.
Because they have the political power, because they have the money that finances campaigns, right? And because that gives them some power over some of these elected officials as they go through. When we have developers looking at, well, we want to build another retirement village, and then selling it to their elected officials as, with a retirement village, you don't have to worry about schools, more school kids. You don't have to serve more school kids, but you'll get more people living here, and you'll get another tax, group, but you won't have to serve children. Okay, but we still have all of these families that need this service, but they're not being served. Okay, again, what are you spending your money on? Those are your values. Those are the priorities. A budget is a value statement.
And what's really frustrating about it is we don't have the data. So the reason you have data in Athens is the Georgia Institute of Community Housing through UGA did a study. They do 3-year studies in coordination with municipal governments to address affordable housing. That has to be done at the behest of the municipal government. So finding data for Clark County is really easy, but in my district, finding the same data for Walton or Coney County is nearly impossible, or it just doesn't exist.
Right.
And that's, I'm a technocrat. We had to start with data. We got to look at how bad the problem is, and we just don't even know.
I guess we need data on all different levels, because even when it comes to policing and community issues, we don't have data, especially in the areas that you mentioned as well. So, data is a good place to start, but I definitely believe, I will bring this up because I brought it up earlier, SB 322. That was one of the bills that I thought would have been a good one, because basically it would exempt builders that are building affordable housing projects from development impact fees. So it's an incentive. So that's why I'm like, we have more incentives to encourage the developers to build, more affordable units. But then as I was going back and forth with Deborah, it seems like that bill has might have changed into something else, and it's not going to benefit the people. So y'all need to, everybody that's watching, like Zach brought up, 40% runs the town. And that's tradition, and those 40% are traditionally comfortable, and they're not dealing with the issues like the crisis with the housing crisis. And 60% that is dealing with the issue is not as engaged and involved because they're trying to survive. They're trying to keep a roof over their head. So it's a tricky way of doing this, but strategically the 60% have to rise up and collectively begin to vote and go to the mayor and the commission meetings. And we have to figure out some type of strategy so that if you have to work 2 jobs, that someone is helping you to make sure you know what's going on in your community and telling you how you can use your voice. So I would just say everybody needs to get engaged and involved, especially ones that are being impacted by these conditions and by the people that's in office that's not really considering you.
Yeah, I wanted to, Mocha, you asked a question a little bit earlier about inclusionary housing zoning, and support that fully. I'm on the same page here in that when we have diverse communities, it's a strength. It's a resilient community. It's a community where folks know about each other as people and they recognize the challenges that each other face. And it encourages empathy because you see folks, some that are going to be like you and some that are not. And it's very important that we realize that's what a community consists of. Monocultures are dangerous in all aspects. They're brittle, and that's what we're seeing right now. We've had a brittle political monoculture of not taking care of people and allowing the wealth inequality gaps to grow over generations and generations. And we are paying that price for that poor leadership, for the lack of balance in that leadership. And when Deborah and I both ran for the State House in 2017, like I mentioned earlier, that was one of the things I didn't know. There were a lot of things I didn't know and I needed to learn about while I was doing the job. But one of the things I did know was that we almost had a monoculture in the state legislature. We had a monoculture, we almost had a supermajority, and the supermajority in the state legislature meant that they could override governor's vetoes and they could put constitutional amendments on the ballot without any feedback from any other political party. They didn't have to listen to anyone else. There was no check on their power. So what Mocha, you're saying about getting people out to vote, you are the check. People who are listening right now, you are the check on political power. It's not me. It's not Mocha, it's not Deborah, it's not Zach, it's not Richard. It's you, the voter, who are the check. And if you exercise that power, we will be the focal point to focus that power, but we have to have you with us. We don't get to do it by ourselves. It is a people-powered movement, and it requires people to do more than just vote. It requires people of comfort to bust out of that comfort, people of privilege to bust out of that privilege, to know who their neighbors are, not just the neighbors who live next door to them, who are wealthy and successful and haven't felt the issues of coronavirus, but go meet the people who are getting help by Athens Mutual Aid Foundation organization, and the folks who are asking for money to help get a tire fixed because they're not going to be able to get to the job that they do have right now. So it is a people-powered movement. People have to exercise. And when I tell you this, I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. When you exercise that power, I can speak for myself that I will show you how that power has an impact. I will reward your faith, reward the impact of your faith in me and faith in these other folks here by showing you how that has an impact. And I think that's something that President Trump has been dying to do, is to drive cynicism in the heart of anybody who believes that there's hope. He's trying to destroy hope. That is why the pandemic politics are let people die. That's what it boils down to. Let people die because otherwise we're going to run out of money. And that is a false premise. And I will leave it at that.
Yeah.
That's actually, I think, a wonderful place to kind of end on, Jonathan. And I appreciate you bringing up hope, because something I think I was a little remiss to do last time is we ended just kind of right where we were. And I was in the midst, I'm sure most other people who were watching, because you think about these issues and you get so up in your feelings and stress because these things are hard. But I think it'd be great to end on a bit of a hopeful note. And so I'd ask each one of you, you can take a second if you need to, but think of something that right now is bringing you some hope. And I'll go while I go, that way you guys can think about it. And actually, you all give me a lot of hope. Having people who are going to try and use a seat of power to actually help empower and spread power to people and the masses of people, the 60% or the larger amount of our community and our society who is not as privileged, but they're the lifeblood. They keep it going. The whole reason we have a society is because of everyone here, and the reason that people with privilege have that privilege is because of those who keep it going, that lifeblood. So I'm given a lot of hope by seeing people who want to take a stand, who use their energy and their time to fight this fight, because it's freaking hard. And I just really admire y'all, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thanks again to my fellow panelists here, candidates who've been willing to step out. What you said is exactly correct. Each of these people willing to step out, sacrifice something in their life, because you can't do this work without giving up something else. That's just the way it is. I say we run politics on the margins. Everybody runs politics on the margins, except for the folks of extreme privilege who are maybe retired and have the luxury to give all of themselves to politics. We're running it on the margins. So what I want folks to hear and take heart from, and what I take heart from, is the amount of people who've stepped up to help out in the campaign for 119, who've been doing the work. Maybe they started in 2016, maybe they started in 1985. Those folks give me hope when they step up again. I've spoke to somebody who we started a program of offering masks to folks. We've been delivering masks to folks in high-risk groups for the last month or so, free of charge. And we called everybody. We made over 7,000 phone calls in the district to give those out to folks. And I spoke to somebody who I didn't speak to the previous 2 cycles when I was running for this seat. And she said, oh, I didn't really know much about you, but now she's working on the campaign. She said, I was working in politics in the 80s, trying to help folks get elected. I got really disillusioned in the early teens. And she goes, I'm willing to help out on your campaign. And we've got folks, a UGA student who came to an event that we held last night, first time getting involved. She's a second-year student saying, I want to make a difference. I want to make an impact. So the movement is building. And our goal as a campaign is not just to flip this seat, not just to flip the state house, so that we have a check on extreme partisan gerrymandering and that we can drive a lot of the good policies that we spoke about today and more, but also to take 500 folks who volunteer and be a part of this campaign. That's my goal that I've asked my team to help me reach. 500 folks, I want to take those folks and help them find a new area of comfort. I want them to stretch themselves and learn how to exercise political power, what their power is, what the rules and regulations are, what it means to assemble with their fellow citizens to drive good policy and hold their elected officials accountable.
Awesome. Anybody else want to go?
Deb, did you want to go?
Well, what always gives me hope is the people. And I think this week I'd like to uplift the youth. So the other day I was participating in a panel about taking police out of schools, right? The danger that has happened, sort of the militarization of school resource officers into an actual police force, and what that has meant to the school to prison pipeline. And there were 2 young people there, both juniors in their high school, and how they had organized the movement in their school and had made things really happen. And so, every time I hear these young people, it gives me hope. And I turned to my husband and I said, okay, we're in good hands. I don't think the administration is good, but these young people, man, they got it. And they've got this, like, they don't see the obstacle. They just see, okay, then we have to work harder, and we have to bring people along, and they're so bold. They're willing to just lay it out there, what it means, and the their struggles. And so they are the ones who give me hope. And that's why, to me, it's so important. Juvenile justice, it is under the DA's office here in Athens and Oconee. And, for the last 18 years, we have thrown away a generation of children. We cannot continue to do that. We've got to bring restorative justice practices in there. We've got to understand that these kids are more than just some stupid mistake that they did Most of the time, we've got to understand what it is that they're going through, the trauma they're going through. It's not just because they're bad and they want to get into this trouble. There's so much more than just that, and we need to have a justice system that acknowledges that understands that, and that will truly give them those second chances that they need. And so the youth is what gives me hope and continues. I put up a picture, of my grandson the other day, because every time when I think I can't take any more, I look at Xander or I look at Axel and I say, and I remember, it's not about me, it's about them. And so they motivate me and they give me hope every single day.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Deborah she spoke exactly about one of the ones that the youth is who I do this for, because it's their future. Our current condition right now is not going to change unless people like Jonathan and Deb step into this field, because then the effect doesn't take change until many years to come. And we're trying to like plant seeds so that the youth, that when you turn 18 and when you're 21 or however old you are, I just see a difference. Like, people are sick and tired, and I'm seeing that the youth is like, my parents might be racist, but I'm over it. I've done spoke to my mom. I done said no more. I'm standing here with you at the Arch, Miss Mocha. When I'm fighting for the school to prison pipeline, just like Deborah brought up, that has been something that I have been huge on, because too many of our youth are being cast away into the justice system, especially Black and brown youth. As a GED teacher, I see too many people that did not get a fair shot in life because of their economic struggle or because of things that went on in their home, that they're just cast to the side, they're criminalized, and these are the people that when you see somebody that's 60 years old walk into your GED class and said, I want to get my GED. When you see somebody that's 30 years old that dropped out of school because they had to go work to help to put food on the table, and they're finally coming back into class because their mom or their grandmom was sick, and they come into class and they say, I want to get my GED because I want to be able to help my child do their homework. You understand? When I have to help a child that's been, their rights have been violated on a school campus, so that they won't be, they've been kicked out of school and they need alternatives, and people have cast them to the side. Those are the people that give me hope, because I know that they want more out of life, and they just need the support. They need people in office. They need people on ground level that would just listen and provide an extra opportunity for them. And they give me hope, because if you can pick yourself up after going through certain circumstances and say you want your GED, or that you want something better out of life, or say that you're sick and tired of systematic racism, and you're sick and tired of the old way, you want change, those are the people that give me hope. So that's why I'm going to continue to do what I do. And everybody out there, on a positive note, don't lose hope. Walk in faith, because I'm telling you, you're looking at a testimony. You're looking at somebody that has gone through different things through different times, even right now. And God has miraculously sent people my way. And you just have to keep pushing forward. You have to keep picking yourself up. You understand? Do not give up. Don't give up, especially on humanity, because we're the one that creates this world. And you matter. Everybody matters.
Woo, that was uplifting. Sorry, Richard and Zach.
Who wants to have the last word? Well, okay, I'll go first. We're under really a dark time, where, given all of the threats to our safety, to our livelihoods, it would seem that this would be the last time in which we could expect people to be able to take collective action. But we're facing a moment of national reckoning, and we've seen that people are standing up. They stood up against racial injustice in all of the massive demonstrations that have continued week after week. And they also recognize that, look, one can go into the streets until hell freezes over without fundamental changes taking place. One has to transform political power and, in a sense, take political power. Well, that moment is coming. It came to some degree in the primaries, and we saw people risking their lives to go out to vote. In a way, just like people had risked their lives at Moore's Ford in 1946, two Black couples that were lynched by a murderous mob with the cooperation of the police. Well, again, to vote, one had to go in line and face the contagion, but people did it in numbers that went beyond previous attendance at such elections. November 3rd is a moment of truth. And I think all the people who are here should show anyone who's listening that you have options whereby you can make a choice at the ballot booth and change the course of this country so that we deal with the issues of justice that we have neglected, so that we fulfill the social rights, that we unshackle our democracy of all the blockages of opportunity. And now it's a matter of life and death. And I do feel hopeful that this is a wake-up call and that people are recognizing it's time to act and that they can do something that can make a fundamental difference. And if they don't do it on November 3rd, they may not have an opportunity for longer than any of us would like. So check me out on winfieldforsenate.com. You can also listen to my podcast, America Unchained. And I hope you will do what you can for all of the candidates who are here at this event. Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm inspired and I'm hopeful by the change that I'm seeing. I'm from a small town up in Northeast Georgia, Clarksville, and it's definitely not any kind of a liberal bastion, but there was a Justice for George Floyd protest up there that had over 100 people. People I went to high school with are speaking out against racial injustice and promoting best practices in social distancing, and they're getting involved in the political process that I never thought I'd see people from my hometown get involved with. And I'm very hopeful by just look at this panel. I challenge you to find a conservative panel that has multiple immigrants, children of immigrants, multiple women, and we don't look like what has existed in the General Assembly or in our elected offices. And I'm hopeful that Georgia's on the precipice of real change. And with the help of those watching and the help of those in our community, that real change can come real soon.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. We went a little over time, but that's only because y'all have so many good things to say. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody who watched. Sadly, somehow my Facebook got frozen, so I did not get to see if you asked a question. I am sorry about that. But we will be back in 2 weeks with another discussion with the same awesome panel. So hopefully you will tune in then. And really quick before we go, everybody did mention mutual aid a couple of times, and I know for a fact that there are 2 mutual aid groups here in Athens, one called Mutual Aid Network and Athens Mutual Aid Network, and one called Mutual Aid Athens. They're both wonderful and they do many good things. Let's help support them and the people who are asking for their help. And let's go vote in November so that their services are not as necessary. So thank you guys so much. We'll see you again next time.